A little girl was part of a church Christmas pageant, playing the role of an angel. Before the service, her nervous mother whispered, "Now, honey, remember when you go out there, you have to look holy and peaceful." The little girl nodded solemnly. But as she walked down the aisle, she tripped on her oversized gown, bumped into a shepherd, and knocked over a cardboard sheep. She stood up, straightened her halo, looked right at her mom, and yelled at the top of her lungs, "Don't worry, Mom, the baby is still okay." That little girl actually got it exactly right. We spend so much time trying to make Christmas look holy and peaceful. Perfect trees, perfect outfits, perfect dinners, perfect presents. But the very first Christmas was anything but perfect. We often imagine the first Christmas as a silent, snowy night on a Hallmark card. But in reality, it was a time of chaos. Think about it. An unexpected pregnancy, a government-mandated census, a long, exhausting journey on foot. Mind you, an almost 150-kilometer long pilgrimage. That's the distance between Nazareth and Bethlehem. And you need at least a week to walk that far. And I know what it means from experience, especially last year walking the Camino. Average 20 kilometers a day. If you walk more, then you get there faster, but then you'll be in a better shape. So that's a lot of extra stress. And finally, while arriving most probably very exhausted and ready to take refuge anywhere, then being rejected at the inn, as we heard it. Jesus wasn't born in a sterile hospital or a cozy nursery. He was born in a hot mess, as it were, a smelly, loud, unsanitary stable surrounded by farm animals. Mind you, I just noticed, especially this year, we don't have animals here in the creche. And we don't have shepherds either. And one reason I can find when somebody came up with this idea for the creche, it was they were not reading the Gospel of Luke. They were reading the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew is talking about the wise men and all those things, but the Gospel of Luke is talking about the shepherds. It's a totally different perspective. Gospel of Luke, perspective of Mary. Gospel of Matthew, perspective of St. Joseph. If you don't believe me, check it out. First chapter of Matthew or the second chapter of Luke that we heard. So, nothing was perfect on the first Christmas night. And yet, that is the good news for all of us. God didn't wait for the world to get its act together before showing up. The Son of God didn't wait for a palace to be built. He arrived right in the middle of the dirt and the noise. And by the way, if you pay attention and if you know anything about the world 2,000 years ago compared to ours today, our world is just as much in need of salvation and healing and putting things right as it was 2,000 years ago. The truth is, most of our lives feel a bit like that stable in the gospel. If we are honest, our hearts aren't most of the time, quote unquote, peaceful and bright. They are often filled with a churning mess, as it were, the stress of bills, the pain of a broken relationship, the grief of an empty chair at the table, or the secret feeling that we aren't doing enough. That's our real life. You might be sitting here today feeling like your life is too messy for God to care about. But look at the manger. Think of that manger 2,000 years ago. Into that animal shelter in the dead of night, the Christ child arrives. And he brings a peace that doesn't come from having a perfect life, but from knowing we aren't alone. How do we find that peace today? How do we find that peace that only the Christ child can give? Maybe we can look at Mary and Joseph. They weren't superheroes. They were ordinary people who were probably very overwhelmed. And still, they did at least two things to find the peace that comes from God. First, they listened. Even with all the voices of fear and the pressures of the world around them, they listened for the voice of God. Are we listening for the voice of God in the midst of all the other disturbing, frightening, and discouraging voices? And then both Mary and Joseph said yes to God from the very beginning. They didn't wait until they understood everything. They simply trusted that God was at work in the improbable and the impossible things too. What improbable or impossible looking things are in our lives that could be accompanied by God's call to trust fully and in spite of our fears, make the first step? We don't need to be a theological expert to find God this Christmas. We just need to be willing to say to God, the creator and ground of our being, "Here I am, Lord, let your peace be in me. Here I am, Lord, let your peace be in me." One of the titles that was given to the baby Jesus was Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that doesn't mean that God with us once we've cleaned up our act, or God with us only when we're in church, but God with us, period. Always, everywhere, all the time. Nothing, not your mistakes, not your past, and certainly not your mess, can take away your dignity as a child of God. You were created. Each one of us was created in God's image, and that is a blessing that can never be canceled out by anyone, by anything. The Christ child is coming to uncover and restore this original nature of ours that we received from our Creator. And we return to this manger year by year to be reminded of that, to be reminded of our original face that God gave us. So as you look at the nativity scene this year, don't just see a pretty decoration. See a God who is willing to get his hands dirty to be close to you. Whether you are here for the first time in years or the first time this week, know this: God is accompanying you faithfully from your first breath to your last. May you all welcome the Christ child into the stable of your heart and life today, and may you leave here knowing you are deeply, perfectly loved. So be it. Amen.